So it's important to recognize that what we speak of here is that continuation from the previous verses. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Remembering that the moth refers to clothing, which was a common expression of wealth and still is. Rust, the actual word is to be eaten up, so it's actually referring to food rather than to any kind of metal. And then where thieves break in and steal, referring to more tangible wealth, such as gold, silver, precious jewels. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Importantly, that treasure, though most directly identified as wealth in monetary terms, treasure is whatever you value. Whatever it is you value. Can you find which channel is making that buzzing sound, please? Is it my guitar? Can you mute that? Correct. Almost. That's in a few weeks. What you treasure is simply whatever you value, whatever you place value upon, whatever you prioritize. And so though it can be money and is very commonly money, it can be many things. It's whatever you value. And we remember that this, in fact, is in the context of the previous words where Jesus warned about doing good things, doing good works to be seen by men, right? Do not give alms to be seen by men. Do not pray to be seen by men. Do not fast to be seen by men. For if you do that, you will have your reward, which is you got to be seen by men. And that's the extent of it. And then following up on that idea, Jesus says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Well, what's in the context of those other verses? The treasure on earth is simply the approval of men that they seemed to be taking that they seem to be treasuring, that they seem to value so highly. And so if you're doing things in order to be seen by men, you're storing up for yourselves treasures on earth in that regard. And in all of those three passages, Jesus said, you will receive your reward, which is to be seen by men, but your Father in heaven will not reward you. Instead, if you do those things in secret, in other words, not to be seen by men, but simply because they are the right thing to do, and because of your love for God and your desire to be obedient to him, then your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Presumably in heavenly ways, because Jesus comes in with, don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, but rather lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And so doing things in order to be seen by men is laying up treasures for yourselves on earth. But doing things in order to be seen by God and God alone is storing up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Now, Jesus expands that idea from more than just doing good things. He's also talking about storing up. It covers also our tendency to try to store up wealth for ourselves. Now, there's a big difference between becoming wealthy and storing up wealth. To store up means to hoard, to collect, to accumulate, right? And Jesus says, don't do that. Not on earth, at least. Because that's not what the earthly treasures are for. Jesus doesn't say, do not get earthly treasure. He says, don't store it up on earth. That's a foolish thing, because you're trying to store up something corruptible inside a corrupted world. And so if that becomes your security, which is what you're doing when you're storing up for yourself, you're trying to establish some kind of security. If you try to establish your security in corruptible things, then you will have no security. Certainly not eternal security. He says that's a foolish thing to do. wherein he identifies the proper use of earthly treasures, which is to be used, not to be stored. So Jesus doesn't condemn wealth per se, but he does warn against storing up your wealth for your own security, because we are not given wealth to simply find our security in it. We are given wealth to use wealth. If you are made wealthy, it's because God intends for you to use that wealth for his good, for his purpose. If instead you accumulate and you sit upon it, then you put your security in that which is corrupted and corruptible, rather than putting your security on him. That we related this back to the manna, right? To the manna, where Jesus, or where God was trying to teach the Israelites not to find security for themselves by their own efforts, but to fully rely upon him each day. Give us this day our daily bread. Each day, and trust that he will be their security. He will be their providence. He will give to them what is needful. And I think we often forget that is what God requires of us. He requires us to rely upon him, not on our own abilities, not on our own ability to make wealth, not on our own ability to accumulate security, not on our own ability to provide. He, in all things, directs us to depend upon him. Now, that does not mean we sit around and do nothing, but it means that we obey what we are told to do, right? Because though God provided the manna for the Israelites, they still had to go out and collect what was provided. And if they didn't collect it, they wouldn't have any. Pretty straightforward. But he also directed them, do not collect more than what you need. And so we're not called to be lazy and just wait on God to do everything. We're called to be obedient, to be diligent, to be hardworking, but do not exceed what is needful. And if you are given much, it's not so that you can just have much. You are given much. You are meant to use it. Because if you try to store it up, well, guess what? Moth and rust destroy, and thieves break in and steal. And you're storing up for yourselves treasures on earth, and this earth is going away, and your treasure will go with it. However, if you will store up in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, where thieves cannot break in and steal, then your security will be assured. So do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, for where your treasure is, where you place your value, what you value, what you prioritize, reveals where the center of your being truly lies. If it's in money, then that's where your heart is. If that's what you truly value above all else, that's where your heart will be. If it's in the approval of men, then that's where your heart is. That's where you'll be found. If it is in looking nice, in nice clothes, if it's in having nice things, if it's in this relationship with this person or that relationship with that person, if it's in politics, if it's in anything found in this world, wherever your value lies, wherever you place your value, that's where your heart is. And so the question for self-examination is, what do you value? Where is your heart? What do you treasure? What do you prioritize? And if you spend some time and you really think that out, you meditate upon it, you ask yourself and answer honestly, that will tell you where your heart lies. Where is your heart? Well, it's where your treasure is. Now, that idea leads us very neatly into verse 22. The eye is the lamp of the body. The eye is the lamp of the body. So, as I said, I have found most often that this section is taught separately from the one about treasure, about what we treasure. But it's actually the same thought. It's continuing the same thought. And here's a little bit, and we'll as we examine this, we'll expand on how that is. So we start with the eye is to the body what a lamp is to a room. That's what's being said here. The eye is to the body what a lamp is to the room. What does a lamp do in a room? It illuminates. You turn on a lamp and you can see everything in the room. You see everything in the room because of the illumination of the lamp. In the previous chapter, Jesus said, "You are the light of the world." A city set on a hill, right? He said, "No one lights a lamp and then hides it under a bushel or a basket, but they set it in the room on a stand, and it gives light to all the house," right? This is the same sermon, so Jesus hasn't forgot that he said that either. The eye is the lamp of the body. The eye does for the body what a lamp does for a room. Get out of here, dude. And so if a lamp illuminates a room, then the eye illuminates the body. Now that, on the face of it, is a very obvious statement. We know that. We can see everything because of our eye. Now, how does that relate to storing up treasures in heaven rather than on earth? And your heart is where your treasures lie. Well, it's because, and it's amazing that this is found here, it's because when you pay attention to something, you are implicitly assigning value. We very briefly talked about this last week at the end there. But whenever you give your attention to something, you are implicitly assigning value. Blair, did you start record on this? Thank you, Blair. I just remembered. So there are trillions of things happening around you at every second. Literally trillions of things that are happening around you. At every second, at every moment. You are consciously unaware of most of those things. Your brain and your eyes tune out the majority of things happening around you because you cannot process. If you tried to process everything happening around you, it would paralyze you. You would be unable to function in the world. And so, in order to function so that you can actually do things and you can exist and move and all of that, your eyes and your brains tune out the overwhelming majority of things around you. And instead, it focuses your attention on whatever is important, on whatever is needful. it prioritizes what is considered most valuable in that second. And so whatever you pay attention to shows you what you value. And so, do not store up treasures, what you value, on earth, but in heaven. And where your treasures lie, there your heart will be also. What you value. So your attention, what you value with your eyes, what you give your attention to, will show you where your treasure is. And so you must be careful with what you treasure, with what you give your attention to. Because in doing so, you are giving value to that thing. So the eye is the lamp of the body. That's true. That is true. He does definitely say that in this context. That's definitely a part of that. And so when we give our attention to earthly things, we are giving them the value of our attention. We are putting, now there are some things which we must give attention to that are earthly, but that doesn't mean we've stored up, right? Earthly treasures are to be used, to be made use of, not to store up. Instead, we must store up treasures in heaven. So you must also be sure to give attention to heavenly things, to meditate upon heavenly things, not to meditate upon earthly things. What are we told? Whatever is good, whatever is holy, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is beautiful, think on those things. What else were we told in Romans? To be spiritually minded is life, but to be fleshly minded is what? Death. What you give your attention to. So the eye is to the body what a lamp is to the room. How do you want your being to be illuminated? With what do you want to be illuminated? Now that's a big question. That's a big question. And we answer that question every day by what we pay attention to. What you choose to pay attention to. Because, like I said, all kinds of things happen and all kinds of things can be presented to your attention, but you don't have to give your attention to them. You understand? What you choose to give your attention to, you have control of that. You don't have control of what presents itself to you, but you have control of whether or not you will attend to it. And so the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be filled with light. Now, this word healthy is interesting. Because though this is a fine use of this word here, it's not exactly the right word. I think the King James has this more correct in this case, where this word is more rightly translated as single. If your eye is single, now, this may seem like a strange word, but if you recall some of the things we've talked about previously, some other verses in the Bible, the singleness of your attention, not divided, not confused, not tossed to and fro by every wind or whim. Single. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Single. Single. United, unified, undivided, unchanging, unwavering. Our God is one thing all the way through. He is who he is. You remember what the definition of part of the definition of being pure and holy is? It's to be one, to be singular, the same thing all the way through. When you purify gold, what are you trying to do? You're trying to remove everything from it that is not gold, so that when the purification process is done and you drop out whatever piece of gold you've been working on, you can say this is pure gold, which means there's nothing else inside of it. It is the same thing all the way through. It's not gold plated. You're not going to remove the top layer that everyone can see and find something different underneath. It's the same thing all the way through, on the outside as well as the inside. One. It's single. The Bible's very concerned with us being one thing, not being many things, not being divided or confused or disunified. It's very concerned with unity. Unity of person, unity of church, unity of being. Very concerned with that. I mean, that's the basis of the old law, where the Israelites were not allowed to wear clothes of two different kinds of cloth. Their clothing had to be all one material. When a man and a woman are married, what does the Bible say? The two become one. It cannot be divided. It cannot be confused. It must be one thing all the way through. And so your eye, what you attend to, must not be divided. It must not be confused. It must not be corrupted. It must be pure. It must be single. That is a healthy eye. Now we can see how clever this example is, because we know if your vision is healthy, you see one thing, whatever it is you're looking at. Now, if you start having vision problems, one of the things is you start seeing double, right? Your vision starts getting messed up, and so you start seeing multiples of things. Well, that's a sign of an unhealthy eye, where your vision gets blurry, or it gets darkened, or you can't see at all. Those are signs of unhealth in the eye. But the sign of a healthy eye is that when you look at a thing, you see the thing. And so our attention must be healthy. We must look in and value, by implication, attend to things which are in line with what we claim to value. What we claim to value. If what you claim to value and what you actually attend to are different things, then you are double-minded. And your eye is unhealthy. It's not single. It's divided. It's confused. It's not pure because something else is in there too. Because if what you attend to is different than what you claim to value, then what you're doing is presenting a gold-plated thing rather than a pure gold thing, because it's gold on the outside, but once you remove what's on the outside, what's inside is different than what it claimed to be. It must be the same thing all the way through, correct? I know. Mom's really pulling the value of your attention at the moment. It's fine. But that's what, it's such a beautifully accurate example of attention and value and the duplicity of being that we so often find ourselves in. Because who among us have not claimed to value one thing, but our attention revealed otherwise? Right? How many of us have, those of us who work and have families, we say, well, I value my family, but they don't get all my attention. Right? I do my work and I come home, but then I'm like, I'm going to go back to work rather than be home. How many of us claim to value our relationship with God, but we give him none of our actual attention, and we spend all of our attention on things of this world? And now, again, that doesn't mean that we don't do anything in the world. It simply means we don't store up things in this world. There are things to do in this world, but those are things to use, not the things to stay on. Our minds must be stayed on him, established on him. That's where we ruminate and we meditate upon and we dwell upon. That's that idea of praying without ceasing. You are giving him your implicit attention at all times, regardless. And so you're spending the earthly treasures by doing what's necessary in the world, but you are giving your true attention to the things above. You understand? So the question, where is my eye? With what am I allowing my body to be illuminated? So if the eye is healthy, if it's single, if it's rightly focused, not divided, not corrupted, then my whole body, my whole being, who I am, will be full of light. Light of the world. City upon a hill. A lamp giving light to the whole room. However, if your eye is bad, that's how the ESV puts it. If your eye is bad, you could obviously say if your eye is unhealthy. If it's diseased or blind, that's what that word translates out to. Diseased or blind. If it's diseased or blind, then the whole body will be full of darkness. Again, that makes sense. If your eyes aren't working, what do you see? Nothing. Darkness. Now, if your eyes do not function at all, that is a lot different than someone just turning off the lights in a room. Because your eyes still work even if it's dark outside. I can still kind of make some things out most of the time, but if your eyes have no function, that's how great is that darkness. It's not that light has become dimmed. It's not that your eyes would work if I could just get some light. It's that, no, there's no chance of light. And that darkness is insurmountable, unrepairable. How great is that darkness? Now let's understand something. The eye is in no way separate from the rest of the body. Your eye is not a separate entity than the rest of you. Your eye is an integral part of the functioning body. It is part of the body. It is not separated. It will not work separated from the body. And it is not affected without also affecting the rest of the body. You understand? What affects the eye affects the whole body. Just like every other part of your body. 1 Corinthians 12 reminds us of that. When one member of the body is in trouble, the whole body is affected. The whole body's in trouble. If you have a disease in your hand, the whole body is affected by it. And so we cannot say something like, well, I can watch this. It doesn't really affect me. Your eye is not some separate part unrelated to the rest of you. Oh, I can listen to that. It doesn't affect me. Or I can do this or do that, be around this, be around that. That doesn't really bother me. As if your eye was some separate entity that could itself experience something without it having any effect on the rest of your being. Everything you give attention to, you are implicitly valuing, and you are allowing to illuminate you. And so the question is, with what do you want your being to be illuminated? With what do you want your being to be illuminated? Yes, ma'am.
Just kind of an interesting fact I recently learned about how our eyes grow as children. If you don't get enough sunlight in your eyes, then your eyes won't properly form and you're more likely to need glasses and have eye disease and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the current research on it says you need 2 to 3 hours of sunlight in your eyes every day, especially as a child, but so that your eyes properly develop.
Right.
So that they're functional.
Yeah.
And
ooh, that's really interesting.
Yeah. And so I thought that was kind of cool, like put your eyes on the sun every day, just kind of like a parallel there of
absolutely.
We have to put in what's good for our eyes if we want them to function.
That's right. That's right. Because if you could imagine a person who was raised in a cave with no light, how would their eyes develop? Well, they wouldn't. Not properly. Maybe their eyes would develop to function in low light, or maybe, like many animals who live in caves, they simply don't develop eyes because it's unnecessary, because they live in darkness all the time. And so we are made to be an adaptable creature. We adapt very easily. That's actually one thing which makes humans so much more superior to every other animal life, is that we are far more adaptive than any other animal. And so what you surround yourself with, you adapt to. That's why humans can live in the most ridiculous circumstances, even unhealthy circumstances. That's why when someone's trying, when like a psychologist or a therapist is trying to figure out why you behave a certain way, they delve into your childhood. Because somewhere along the line in your life, who you are adapted to something. And so the question you need to ask is, again, with what do I want my being to be illuminated with? How do I want to adapt? How do I want to develop? It's very interesting that we have the choice of that. Go ahead.
This makes me think of another interesting health fact. Just the idea that a lot of things get blamed on genetics these days.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I have whatever health problem. It's just runs in my family. It's genetic, whatever. But we all carry potential in our genetics for a lot of different diseases.
Yeah.
But whether or not that gene is triggered into disease depends on our experiences and our environment,
right,
and the stress in our lives, whatever that might look like. So, right. I have a potential for a lot of different things, different types of disease and things in my body based on my genes.
Right.
But what I eat, the people I allow to be close to me in my life, the environment that I live in, all has a greater effect than just what I was born with.
Right. Right.
So it's just, what we put in really, really matters, and what we allow ourselves to be around.
That's right.
Matters a lot.
That's right. Because again, what you attend to, you implicitly value. And where your treasure is, where your value is, there your heart will be also. And so we have to be very careful about what we're attending to. And so Jesus says, if the eye is bad, if it's diseased, if it's blind, divided, corrupted, your whole body will be full of darkness. And if then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? It's an interesting phrase, but I think what it means is, if what you're being illuminated by, if what you're choosing, what to allow to illuminate your being, is actually darkness, then that will be a great darkness indeed. Because it's almost contradictory to say I'm illuminated by darkness. But that's what we do when we give our value and attention to wickedness and evil and pride and all manner of sin. And notice I said we attend to it. That doesn't even mean you're participating in it. It means you're attending to it. You're dwelling upon it. You're watching. You're allowing it to be around you without addressing it. That's why Jesus will also say, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. Because what you attend to, you implicitly value. That's why we're told, do not dwell upon wicked things, but set your mind on the things that are above. because what you attend to, you value, and where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And if the light that you allow within yourself is actually darkness, then that is a great darkness. And guess what? If you think that darkness is light, then how will you function in this world? If there is a being that's been raised in like a cave where there's no light, and you come to them and say, hey, it's really dark in here, they're not going to understand what you mean, because their whole life has been darkness. If a fish doesn't understand that it breathes underwater until you remove it from the water. Just like a person doesn't necessarily value breathing air until you put them in the water. If the light in you is darkness, how are you going to overcome that darkness? Go ahead, Gabe.
That's how the New Living Translation, when I read that part, it translates that. If then the light, what you have in you that you think is light is actually darkness, then how great is the darkness?
Because it's how it's perceived.
Yeah, which again goes back to where you're focused on, because if you're not reading and focusing on the word and gaining the knowledge of what actually is right and wrong, you can be confused as to what is actually light. And I thought it was interesting that you brought up vision too, because that's one of the translations for eye in the Greek. The word that they use is actually vision. Right. So when I was reading this, I feel like verse 22 is that he's giving the answer to how you don't store up your treasures in heaven.
That's right.
So he's giving you a command of what not to do, but then he's giving you the solution on how to do that.
That's right.
Because you're if you view eye as vision, it makes sense, because that's the key to your mind, and which would make sense as to why the Bible talks so much about controlling your mind.
That's right.
Is because what you allow your eyes to be focused on is the gateway into your mind. Kind of like how James in chapter 3 talks about your tongue being able to control your whole body. Yeah, it's just that the message is so much deeper than what you see on face value. Right. And the phrase "full of light" actually translates to of bright character as well.
Bright character. Yeah.
So if your vision is healthy, your whole body will be of bright character.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really cool.
And it's really important to see these things and how they're not separate things. And storing up in heaven rather than on earth, giving your attention to things of light rather than things of darkness, and how that leads into what we'll talk about next week, which is do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will wear, right? Because those are things on earth. Instead, if you attend to the things above, all those things will be added unto you. Don't worry about that. That's manna. That's the daily bread. That will be given if you instead put the kingdom first. Right. But we'll get to that next week. And so if we're here's a really big question. Back to the idea of developing. And you develop and you adapt according to what you're around, what you allow around you. And you can only do this if you're paying attention. That's the thing. You can only control your development, your adaptability, how you adapt. If you can only do that if you're paying attention. If you're not paying attention, you are simply going to, by default, adapt and develop according to your environment. That's natural. That doesn't mean it's right. It's just natural. And you can only change that if you're attentive, if you're paying attention to that. And so, for instance, children will, as they grow up, they will mirror their parents unless they consciously decide not to. which, as a parent, you hope that your child will mirror all the good things and consciously decide to improve upon the bad things. Because guess what? None of us are perfect as parents. We all make all kinds of mistakes. And we just do our best. And we hope that our children will take the best and go further with that and forgive and do better than our mistakes. That's every parent, every good parent's goal, right? But a child can only reject the mistakes if they're paying attention. Only if they're paying attention, which is why marriage is so helpful. Because you often aren't aware of things until someone else who did not grow up with you can look at them and be like, hey, this thing that you're doing right here, don't do that. Stop that. That's bad. Don't do that. That's annoying. Knock that off. Right? Which is why a wife is called a helpmeet, which is also able to be translated as a favorable adversary. I mean, there's a reason. Yes, right. That's why the Lord had to make women so pretty. Yes. Yeah. So that when they point out all the dumb things we men do, we'll just be like, well, at least she's cute. You can stick around, I guess. But if no one was there, if no one's there to point out your mistakes, the darkness which you're allowing, then maybe you're probably not sophisticated enough, none of us are, to be able to pay attention and notice that that's a problem. And so it won't be fixed. That's also why no Christian is meant to be a Christian in isolation. You're supposed to be a part of a body so that when you're doing something not right, the other members of the body can be like, hey, man, don't do that. That's bad. That's not good for you. It's not good for everyone else. Knock that off. You have to be able to you have to be paying attention to be able to adjust, to fix the light that you're allowing in, whether it's actually light or whether it's darkness. And so, but that also means we have to be able to recognize what is light and what is dark. You have to be able to recognize what is right and what is wrong, what is helpful, what is not helpful, what builds up and what destroys, what feeds and what starves. You have to know. You have to be able to recognize that. And not many people are able to. I think it's incredible. When we make claims of things being right or wrong, as if any of us know what's right or wrong. I think for someone to claim that, well, this is good, it's like, how do you know what's good? That's an incredible thing to claim. If you consider it for any amount of time, to claim that, to know that something is right or wrong, that something is good or bad, that's an astounding claim. It's an astounding claim. For someone to say, well, it's bad for this to happen. How do you know? Do you know the effects, all the effects that are going to come as a result of that down the hundreds of years in the future? Do you know what led up to that from the hundreds of years in the past? Do you know how every other element in all of the universe came together for that thing to happen? How are you, a finite, ignorant being, going to be able to declare that anything is good or bad? It's the same answer which God gave Job. Where were you when I called the planets into being? When I call the sun to rise? Do you know where it goes to rest in the evening? Our understanding is so limited and finite that to make any kind of claim of good or bad or right or wrong is wild arrogance, which was the sin in the garden. God said, you can have every fruit except this one. I'm telling you as God that it is bad for you to eat of that fruit. In fact, I'm going to turn there real quick because the wording here, the way this is phrased is really important. Is that Everly? Yeah. If there's a child who got hurt, about 7 times out of 10, it's going to be Everly. Yeah. It happens. That's not good. Probably not. So the Lord commanded them, Genesis 2:16, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. So this is God, the only being in all of existence, in all of reality, who knows all things, who has all power, all authority. The only being who can make this kind of judgment. And he tells man, I give you everything, all that is good. And this, I tell you, is bad. Don't do that. Now, then we should pay attention to the way the serpent tempts, the way he tempts Eve. It says now this in chapter 3, now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? The woman said, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That's Genesis 3, 4, and 5. No, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, on the face of it, one might say, wouldn't it be a good thing to know good and evil? Then I could just not do evil. But again, if all you know is good, you don't have to worry about evil. But if you know evil, all of a sudden you now know the difference. Your eyes are opened. So you see, the serpent is lying in the most convincing way because there is a grain of truth. Your eyes are opened, but if the light which illuminates is darkness, how great is that darkness? What are you opening your eyes to? What's really interesting is that, and I did a super nerdy thing and looked up the definition of the word "and" in that phrase. the knowledge of good and evil. I looked up that word and. It can also be translated as because of. The knowledge of good because of evil. Because you see, how do I know what's good? Most often because I know what's bad. I know that that's good because it's different than this thing. A person who has grown up in the darkness and only the darkness doesn't know the difference between dark and light. I know that you and I know that there's light because of darkness. The shadows prove the sunshine. That's a lovely line from a Switchfoot song. I know I'm cold because I've been hot before. I know I'm hungry because I've been full before. We know things by their contrasts. And so he says, your eyes will be opened and you'll know good because of evil. Now, whether that's the right translation, I don't know. I'm saying that's one translation of the word and. Now, and so the serpent is lying in this convincing way of bringing some truths. Yes, your eyes will be opened. Yes, you will know good and evil, but you'll only know good because you did evil. And yes, your eyes will be opened, but they'll be opened to darkness. And how great will that darkness be? And no, you won't surely die immediately in your body. But that which God breathed into man, that which made him the image of God, that will die because of sin. Because the wages of sin is death. And so, see in verse 6, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, good according to whom? Not according to God. According to whom? To her. When she decided it was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, that it was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of them both were opened, and they saw that they were naked, and they were ashamed. When she saw that it was good for food. And so the sin of the garden is not eating an apple. The sin of the garden is when man was arrogant enough to try to define for themselves what was good and what was evil, rather than trusting God's definition of what was good and what was evil. And that same sin is repeated again and again and again. We live in a day where we are told all kinds of things are good, which God tells us are evil. And the reverse. It's the same sin as the garden. When they saw that it was good, according to their eyes, rather than trusting God saying, this is not good. Because what human is able to say what is good and what is bad? None of us. We are incapable of knowing, truly knowing, what is good and what is bad for ourselves. We must rely upon the only one who has the knowledge and power to make such a claim, and that's God. Right? Go ahead.
It's ultimately an exaltation of yourself over God.
That's exactly
And
right.
which is really that's such an in-depth topic too. But that was, so Jesus talked about how he only does what the Father tells him.
That's right.
So he was being, so when Jesus was being tempted by Satan in the wilderness, it wasn't that Satan was trying to get him to do anything in particular. It was that he was getting him to exalt himself over the Father.
That's exactly
If he
right.
could get him to do anything without the Father's command, he's doing the same sin as Adam.
That's right.
And
And since Jesus is the second Adam, the devil tries to get the second Adam to fall in the same way he got the first to fall.
Yeah. Something I've been pondering on now, and I haven't really dug into it, but you can think about it too, is that I wonder if, because it talks in the New Testament about Jesus restoring his bride, we're the bride of Christ. So I wonder if that wasn't one of the major sins of Adam as well, was the fact that he didn't restore his bride.
I mean, that's
like he could have.
Yeah.
I wonder if he could have corrected the situation by leading. Because when he was questioned, he also blamed
this woman you gave
correct. he didn't take leadership, and
Yeah.
and that's one of the things that there's parallels in there between what Christ did and where Adam failed and where Christ succeeded.
Yeah. There have been a lot of considerations along those lines. Elaine, looked like you had. Oh, okay. Well, you remember, I bring this up all the time, but it's because to me it's one of the more significant, if one can make such a distinction, one of the more significant things Jesus said when the rich young ruler came to Jesus and said, "Good teacher, what must I do to be saved?" And Jesus' response was what? "Why do you call me good? Only God is good. Only God. Nothing else." I know. Only God is good. Why would you call me good? As if you know what good is. And you're presuming that I know what good is. The one who said, like Gabe said, "I do nothing but what the Father tells me." Because only God is good and only God can know what ought to be done. So I will do nothing except what he tells me to do.
That goes along with what we were just talking about too, because he called him rabbi. And the interesting thing in Jewish culture, when the father would enter the room, everybody would stand. Well, being a rabbi, a good teacher, was such a high regard that the father would stand up when his son would come in the room if his son was a rabbi.
Yeah.
So it would be, by calling him rabbi, he was pretty much like putting him in check, saying that because he didn't want to be exalted above his father.
Right. Yeah. And so again, we have this weird idea that we know what's good to pay attention to. We have this weird idea that we know what's good and what's bad. And what's crazy is if you ask any person, most of the time, for most people, what they consider good is not some deep moral reason. It's usually what they like. It's simply what makes them feel good. What makes me feel good and what makes me feel bad. Those are the things that will determine what I value. That's called hedonism. And that does not work. Because we know logically and experientially that just because the thing feels good doesn't mean that it is good. Go ahead.
That is why we have to renew our mind daily.
That's right.
Or we go astray.
And renew our mind according to what?
God's word.
The word.
In meditation.
Because we have been given the word so that we would be able to recognize what is good and what is evil. Just like after the fall, sin reigned and death through sin, but it could not be imputed to man because he did not have the law. But even though sin could not be imputed to man, death still reigned. Because regardless of your awareness of it, the wages of sin is death. You're paying it. That's right. And so, in order to help forestall this, God gave Moses the law so that they could recognize sin, they could recognize good and evil. Now, they were still incapable, right? Right. So once God gave them the law, man now becomes accountable because he knows he's been given what is right and what is wrong. He's been given a law. So now you can be held accountable. Unfortunately, sin, the work of sin, the wages of sin is still death. And the part of man that could have walked in the way of God was killed when Adam allowed it. And so man was still incapable of living righteously because he was dead in his sins already. And so that's why Paul says the law gave power to sin necessarily. And so Jesus had to come, as it said earlier in Matthew, to save his people from their sins. Because sin reigned. Man had no resistance to it because they were already killed by sin. And so Christ had to come and raise them up from what they could not raise themselves from. And so we are given the word so that we would be able to define what is good and what is evil. Not according to our standard, but according to the only standard which could actually know. And so, again, what is the light which you allow yourself to be illuminated by? Is it what God has directed, or is it what you yourself have decided is good? And if the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Because you won't even recognize it as darkness. And if you don't even know it's dark out, you won't know to get out into the light. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's right now. That's right now. I'm more and more convinced that we are reliving the Tower of Babel. Because man has decided to make a name for himself. And except it's just through technology now. And so man has said, regardless of how God made you, if you want to be something else, you are. You get to define yourself. You get to decide who you are. As if you know who you are. As if you are high enough to recognize what is good or bad to be. And this is getting a little far, and this is something I've thought about, and you can ignore it. It's not that big a deal. But with the idea of artificial intelligence now, AI, man is creating a new life form. So if man is taking upon themselves to create a new life form outside of God, you remember with the Tower of Babel, they said, let us build a tower up to the heavens, up into the heavens. In other words, to be equal with God, to raise ourselves to God. And Jordan Peterson made this observation, which really I had already started thinking along these lines, but it really propelled me more into this thinking, which is where now, and what did God do to humanity at the Tower of Babel? Confuse their language. What are we dealing with today? A confusion of language. Man doesn't mean man anymore, and woman. What's the question? What is a woman? And no one can answer. We can't. We can. We can. And why are we able to? Because we rely upon God, who actually knows, to define for us what is good and evil, not relying upon our pathetic, limited ignorance to define for us.
Told that we I can't say the difference between a man and a woman.
Right.
Like you said, it was a family member.
Sure.
And we got deep into it. I said, I tell you what, I'm not gonna change my mind. So ain't no use talking about it.
Yeah. I mean, it is a confusion, and now we can no longer understand each other because the most fundamental parts, the most fundamental things are now confused. Right? It's as if going to someone and saying, it's light outside, and they say, I don't know what light is. How do you even begin to explain light? Well, that's why we need families. We need families who are submitted to God.
I think that it's turning back.
Yeah,
I think that it's coming back around, and because that's something that I've looked into. I've been reading Revelation a lot and trying to understand it more.
Yeah.
And I think that the reason that the Bible says that nobody knows the day or the hour is because there isn't one. If you see in the Old Testament prophecies, like in Isaiah and I think in Ezekiel, when they would prophesy about a forthcoming punishment, it wasn't guaranteed. There was always unless you relent, or you repent and change from your ways, then it wouldn't have happened. So I think that there's a level of depravity that we're going to reach where there's definitely a line where God's going to say, okay, this is it. But it's not that it's necessarily a set date. We're going to go in cycles until it finally gets to that point. So just because we're seeing a bad now doesn't mean that it can't turn back around, that we can't repent and we can't delay what is to come.
Yeah.
Biblically proven.
Go ahead, Elaine.
Okay. Have you ever watched The Chosen?
Yes.
I have not, but I've heard a lot about it.
What
yes.
he's talking about is real interesting. How they laid that. Oh, I'm sorry. What they tell you, it showed me in a way how, like he's talking about, but how the father or Jesus is his father, but let's say the groom's father, he'll eventually say, now it's time, go get your bride. But what he's talking about, to me, it related.
Yeah.
If you ever watched The Chosen, do you agree
I
with
don't.
The Chosen at all?
Not really. No. You don't have to apologize. I don't fault. I had this really long conversation about this with some Catholics. I don't fault anybody for watching it. I just myself don't watch it. Not because I'm like, I'm not going to watch this. It's just more like I'm not motivated to watch it in particular. But I don't fault anybody for watching it. If you enjoy it, wonderful. I'm glad you do. I'm not. I have no opinion. I have zero opinions on that matter. But we get to this. So we have all of that, which is a whole lot, right? And we could continue getting in deeper and deeper. But then we have verse 24, which again, still in the same place. No one can serve two masters. He will hate the one, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Again, your eye must be single. One thing. One thing. You cannot serve God and money. Now, that doesn't mean you cannot have money and be a Christian. It's what do you serve? What are you? Where does your heart lie? Where is your treasure? One may have money without treasuring money, but it's difficult. It's very difficult. Because with great wealth comes great temptation. Go ahead, Alicia.
I think as Americans too, we probably just don't really understand what it means to really, really be poor. I'm not saying that some people may have had stronger experiences in that area than others,
Sure.
but it's very different to live in our country than it is to live other places. Where for us, if we went without meals for a couple days, we would actually probably be okay.
We call that intermittent fasting now.
Right. And it's so different, our perspective on wealth, than the perspective some other people might have in the world. And I think it's a good reminder for us to, instead of focus on what we don't have, to first be thankful for what we do.
Of course.
And not allow our worry for what we may or may not have tomorrow to rule our emotions and our behavior.
Yes.
Because that's what will drive you to hoard things up and never let them go. And how many of us have houses full of stuff we don't use or need? And, and so that it's just something that I think we have a unique position where most of us have a lot more than we need.
Yes.
And we need to be careful about that.
Well, and that's the danger of wealth, is that wealth gives you such a luxury of not having to pay attention. And again, if you're not paying attention, you automatically adapt and develop according to the things around you that you're not attending to. That's one of the great dangers of wealth. And the Bible is full of warnings about the temptations that come along with wealth. And like Alicia said, we have such a skewed idea of what wealth is, because Americans in general, I mean, I know a lot. I know we may hear this and say, well, I'm not wealthy. It's probably not. But you're probably, for the most part, most Americans are wealthier than the rest of the world. That's just the fact. If you're an American, you're in the top 1% of humans in all of history. That's not debatable. That is a fact.
Well, what's your idea of wealth?
Right. And that's what it comes down to. It's the question of, what do you mean by wealth?
Mm-hmm.
And wealth is a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that money is the easiest thing to quantify. It's the easiest way to define wealth. But wealth is a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And to have a wealth of anything is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Because you will just start depending upon that thing. And the question is, or the statement is, no one can serve two masters. It doesn't say no one can have two things. It's a question of, what are you serving?
Children's song running through my head through the whole talk today is Anyone who has 2 shirts should give to the one who has none.
Yeah.
Anyone who has food should do the same.
Yeah.
And it's just like such a wild thing of like, but I only have 2 shirts. How can I give half of my stuff away?
Right.
Or I need this food. How can I give that away?
But to the person who has none, you're
Mhm.
wealthy.
Yeah.
It's like, you're like, I only have 2 shirts, but to the guy walking around with no shirt, he's like, you have 2? Yeah. And what's interesting about that song is moth and rust, clothes and food. Right. No, go ahead. Oh, it looked like you were raring to go on something. Yeah. Right. But how do we know what we serve? Well, Paul gives us that answer in Romans. He says, do not be deceived. Whoever you are submitted to obey, him do you serve. What compels your obedience? That's what you serve. What do you give your attention to willingly and often? What are you consumed by? That's what you serve. A lot of us serve our phones. It's such a tired subject, I know, but it's still, because how many of us, when we don't have anything to do, automatically pick up our phone without even thinking about it?
Mm-hmm.
You don't even think about it. You know what that's called? It's called a compulsion. Do you know what compulsion means? To be compelled. Do you know what to be compelled is? To obey something. You're enslaved.
If you ever go out like to a restaurant or someplace where you just have a seat, you put your phone down, just take a seat and just look, just scan, and you see all the people, families that are out, and every single one, maybe one, won't be on their phone. And I just sit back and I'm like, that's awful. That creates a separation from the family. It disassociates everyone from each other, and that's what the enemy wants.
Yeah.
To not have a family unit, to not be one together.
Yeah.
And it's just mind blowing.
Alicia.
To jail.
Straight to jail. That's right. Alicia and I have a rule: when we're at the dinner table, phones away. You can't pick up the phone. And if
sometimes I catch Jared looking at his phone, so I'll pick up my phone and text him straight to jail. And he has to put his phone
Go
down.
to jail.
Or
Put
we'll
the phone in
just say
jail.
it. Or we'll just say it.
Yeah.
It's like a funny way to keep each other accountable.
But you have to pay attention to the things that compel your behavior, because that's something you serve. If whatever you are submitted to obey, that do you serve. Now, we can serve a number of things within a certain capacity. You kind of have to in certain ways, right? I as a husband am directed by God to serve my wife, and likewise she is directed to serve me. But when it comes to my whole being, I am called to serve one master. And a sign of who I actually serve is found in what I value and what I pay attention to. Am I attending to God? When a king has a court, there are a lot of people in that court, and they are called his attendants, the royal attendants. And do you know what the royal attendants do? They stand around and they watch the king, and they attend to his wishes. They watch. And when the king has something he wants done, they come forward to receive what is needed, and they attend to it. So, to whom are we attending? And that's the question. And you do not deceive yourself into thinking you can attend to more than one master. That's Jesus' point here. The eye must be single. Must be single. Because if you try to serve two masters, you will hate the one and love the other. And the word hate here is a little different than what you think it is. Because it's not, it really just means you love the one less. This is a thing which we misunderstand a lot of times when reading the Bible. This is called a comparative statement. It's using two extremes as a way to illustrate a relationship between things. Yes, there's a passage, I think it's in Luke, but it may also be in Matthew, where someone comes to Jesus and says, "Hey, your mother and brothers are coming; they need to see you." And he's like, maybe it's that passage, but at some point, Jesus says, "Anyone who does not hate their mother and their father and come after me is not worthy of the kingdom." Now, do you think God wants you to hate your parents? No. So we know that there's probably something here we're not understanding. It's this comparative statement, right? It basically means you have to love God more than your parents. Not actually hate, but it's to love less. When God said, "Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated," that's in the Bible. We're like, but I thought God loved everyone. He does. It's a comparative statement. It's a cultural kind of statement. It means God gave more favor to Jacob than he gave to Esau. You say, well, that's not fair. Who are you to say what's fair? We go back to it. Who knows what's good? God. No one else. Jacob did lie. So we know it's not because of Jacob. Jacob was something else. And so you cannot serve two masters. You will hate the one and love the other. Or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. It's interesting that the opposite of devotion is despise. To devote, to despise. Do you know to despise is to take lightly, to not consider as important. That's what it is to despise. And so when we take God lightly, when we don't consider him important, that's to despise him. That's the opposite of devotion. You're either going to be devoted to him or you're going to despise him. You cannot serve God and money. You can serve God with money, but you can't serve God and serve money as well.